there's something that happens to me sort of semi-regular, but I know it's coming, right? I know the triggers for this thing happening to me. I know them, but it doesn't matter if I know the triggers or not. It's still going to hit me. It's still going to come on me at some point because I've lived all these years and I've figured it out. And what I'm talking about is a severe cold, all right? And it's really combined with my asthma and allergies and stuff. It really hits me hard. And basically, I know that if I go multiple days without adequate sleep, inadequate sleep is what for me 6 to 8 hours, something like that. So if I've gone a long period of time and not having enough sleep and not eating correctly, eating junk food, stuff like that, I know it's going to catch up with me. It's going to hit me, and I'm going to be out. I mean, it's 24 to 36 hours of doing nothing but laying in the bed, letting it take its course, popping Alka-Seltzer, cold medicine, everything else, whatever else I can do, and just laying and then let it run its course. I know it's going. I know it's coming because I know when I get to that point what's going to happen. And what I've learned is if I don't take a break, I break down. I've learned that. If I don't take a rest will take me. That's what I've learned in all these years. But technically, it's not something that I experience to make me know this. This is a biblical principle. This is a biblical principle that's actually been there from the very foundation of creation and then reinforced with the Israelites during their wander years. And it's this principle: rest is part of God's character. Rest is part of God's character. Now we find the beginning of this literally in the beginning. Genesis chapter 2, right? Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 and 3. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from the work of creating all that he had done. All right? So, first of all, God blessed the seventh day, made that day something special. He blessed it. He didn't do work on that day, and he made it holy. So all that combined there from the very foundation of the world. And then just to make sure that the Israelites did not forget this abiding principle, God included this whole concept in the top 10 things that makes him smile. Have y'all heard the top 10 things that make God smile? You might refer to them as 10 commandments. But he said in Exodus 28, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. That's in the top 10. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Now, obviously, we see the word holy mentioned in the Genesis account. We see the word holy mentioned here in the Exodus account, right? And there's a connection between rest and being holy. And we're going to make that connection toward our end of our time today, but I want you to make sure you understand that it's there, that connection is there. In Exodus, there's a further step. The further step that rest is part of its character, but there's also some significance to this rest because it's detailed in Exodus 23, verse 12. 6 days, do your work. But on the seventh day, do not work, so that your ox and your donkey may rest. Aren't you glad I used this translation? I'm not. I wish I'd chosen another one because I had a little more fun with the other translations, right? So if you have your little Bible app, Google other translations, and you'll know what I mean. All right? So that your ox and donkey may rest, so that the slave born in your household and the foreigner living among you may be refreshed. So here's the physical thing. Literally is a physical thing about taking this rest, this Sabbath rest. Is for the physical recuperation of a person and of their animals, too, the barnyard animals, those on the farm. You give them a rest as well. Those of you who are in this room that work out, and I know there's tons of you that work out, because every morning I come early, Crunch is filled up. The parking lot's filled up, right? So I know you're there. You're working out. You're doing a whole lot of stuff. And I know from your experience, not mine, because I have never been a person that worked out a lot, never a person that lifted weights a lot, but I know enough about it to be dangerous, right? But here's what I do know, that when you're lifting weights, you don't lift weights for that particular muscle group day after day after day after day after day. You take a break. You give those muscles time to recuperate. Same thing with working out. You don't work out every day doing the same exact thing every day. You need time to rest, right? One of the reasons why I never started CrossFit, because I always find a reason not to do something, right? And one of the reasons that I made a decision not to do CrossFit was a number of years ago. A guy in our church was hospitalized because he was doing CrossFit too much, because he didn't take a break. It didn't let his body recuperate. All right. So Pat Hellman and I made a pact. We're not going to do CrossFit. All right. We made a pact. All right. So I've learned all that. I've learned all that about physically a body needs to take a break. So we looked at Genesis, we looked at Exodus, but if you've been reading through our reading plan, Leviticus is where we are this week. All right. And here we find in Leviticus another command, the similar. And here's the deal. Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. If you're reading through with this plan in, 4 or 5 weeks, you'll be through all those and into Judges or whatever. You read the same things over and over again. There's so many things that seem to be repetitive because they are repetitive. There's things that God is including in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy for a reason. And the reason is we forget. God's people forget. God's people need to be reminded over and over again of what to do and what not to do. And so it seems to me that the things that God keeps putting in there over and over again are pretty important. We repeat our important things. When we're teaching our kids or our grandkids things that we want them to know and to remember that potentially could help them or at least keep them from pain, we repeat it over and over again, right? Do not put your hand in the fire. Do not put your hand in the fire, right? We're going to repeat stuff like that. We're going to make sure that they understand. The same thing with Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. We repeat it. It's repeated, and here's repeated again. Leviticus 23:3. We see this idea, this principle again. There are 6 days when you may work, but the seventh day is a day of Sabbath rest, a day of sacred assembly. So that sacred assembly is included here when it had not been included before. Other was make it holy. Make it holy. But now, sacred and holy are sort of similar, truthfully, in their word origins. But make this day a sacred assembly coming together. You are not to do any work wherever you live. It is a Sabbath to the Lord. Now, again, the Israelites are wandering around. They're wandering around for 40 years, right? They're in the midst of this. And God is telling them, hey, doesn't matter where you land in these wanderings. Every seventh day, stop and rest. Make that day holy. No matter where you are. Right? This is literally a guiding principle for the rest of their lives. Because he's telling them this while they're in their wander years, but it's a principle that's supposed to carry them through to whenever they get to the promised land. They're to still do this. They're going to go around in circles. 40 years, basically going around in circles. No matter what you're doing, no matter where you are, no matter who is threatening you, you need to take a Sabbath. You need to take a rest. And then we get to Deuteronomy. So again, another place for God to repeat what he's already done. repeating for emphasis, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy as the Lord your God has commanded you. So holy again has popped up. Holy again popped up in Genesis, Exodus, and now Deuteronomy. The word holy keeps popping up for this Sabbath day rest. Holy literally means simply set apart. Set apart. And in the context of talking to the Israelites, God was telling them, hey, you guys are going to be doing something no one else is doing. Every other culture that you come across in your wanderings, they're not going to be doing this. It's going to be unnatural. They're going to probably look at you like you're nuts. What in the world are you doing? Right? Because we go back again to Genesis. We are created in the image of God. And being a part of that image means we have part of God's character in us, and part of God's character is to rest, is to take a Sabbath. And when you do this, you are setting yourself up apart from every other culture. You're setting yourself apart. So God's telling His people, no matter what, no matter how many different people you encounter in your life, no matter where you go in your lifetime, if you follow me, if you love me, if you honor me, if you look to me as your God, you are going to be different. You're not going to be like anyone else. And when you start living like this, people aren't going to understand why you are living like this. They don't understand because they've never experienced it. They've never experienced what it means to be set apart by the Creator. What God was doing was He was setting His people up for success by telling them, take this day, take this Sabbath day, no matter what, because that practice will be extended into the next phase of your lives. And that next phase is the promised land. When you're going to enter Canaan, the land flowing with milk and honey, there's going to be fruit everywhere. There's going to be plenty to eat in this promised land. And when you read the full story that you'll get to if you're reading with us in there, the manna stops once they get into the promised land, which means the promised land had plenty of fruits and vegetables and plenty to eat. Right? They were going to have that in the promised land. Didn't have it in the wonder years. Wonder years, they had manna every day, and some quail thrown in there. Right? But this principle of rest was going to be carried over to that land that they were going to inhabit. Because Leviticus goes on and tells us this. The Lord said to Moses on Mount Sinai, speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land, when you enter that next phase of your life, after the 40 years of wandering, once you enter that land, I'm going to give you. The land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years sow your fields, and for 6 years prune your vineyards and gather their crops. But in the 7th year, the land is to have a year of Sabbath rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. Do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. So you plant your six-year harvest. You harvest at that 6th year. Once you harvest that crop, don't touch it. Don't go back out there. Don't do anything for a whole year. Don't do a thing. You know, smart people that go to school for years and years and lots of years of experience will tell you, don't plant the same crops year after year on the same tract of land. Because over time, the quality and the quantity of that crop will be diminished. And it will get diminishing every year if you plant the same thing year after year on that same tract of land. Now, smart people figured this out. Farmers figured this out years ago. Farmers started crop rotations long before scientists said anything, because farmers are smarter, right? They started that crop rotation. What you saw, if you saw a field of cotton in 23, most likely will be a field of peanuts in 24. because they're going to rotate the crops and not going to put anything in there. There are still some farmers around the world that will let their land lay fallow every so often, following this biblical principle. There are still some of those that happen there. But here's the deal. The bottom line, if the field doesn't take a Sabbath, the Sabbath will take a field, because it will quit producing if you keep planting the same thing year after year after year on it. Okay? That field will get to the point where it will not produce. The same is true for you and me. If you don't take a Sabbath, the Sabbath will take you. If you don't take a Sabbath, the Sabbath will take you. If I didn't take a rest, rest is going to take me. I've experienced that. I know that. So in Exodus, we find this out. Observe the Sabbath because it's holy to you. Anyone who desecrates it is to be put to death. Those who do any work on that day must be cut off from their people. Is that a little bit harsh? Yeah. Is it overkill? Pun intended? Yeah, it is. Right? But could it be, we always read, we can't help but to read the Old Testament with a New Testament lens. We can't help do that. All right? So we have to have both in mind when we're reading this. And so when I'm reading this, and I know that Jesus came to fulfill the law, he didn't abandon it, but some of the principles, all the principles that we find in the Old Testament, and particularly these rules, there's a reason behind them. And I think that when God goes to this extreme measure of making sure people understood the importance of the Sabbath, it was for our protection. He was protecting us. He was protecting us from our bodies breaking down. Because if we don't take a Sabbath, the Sabbath's going to take us. We are created in God's image. And part of having His image is having His character within, having part of His character within us. And that means we take this time of rest. That's part of God's character. And I bet some of you have some similar stories to mine. When I don't take a break, I'm going to break down. I bet some of you have faced those consequences of not having enough rest. When we continue to read this principle and understand this principle, we find out that when God's people don't listen to Him and don't apply His principles, some negative stuff's going to happen. I will scatter you among the nations and will draw out my sword and pursue you. Your land will be laid waste. Your cities will lie in ruins, and the land will enjoy its Sabbath years all the time that it lies desolate. And you are in the country of your enemies. There the lamb will rest and enjoy its Sabbath, and all that time it lies desolate. The lamb will have its rest it did not have during the Sabbaths you lived it. When you read some future further on into the Old Testament, you find this as a fact, that it happens to their land. When you don't take a Sabbath, the Sabbath's going to take you. And we figured out that our church was not the only one that experienced this. Churches around the world, when everything shut down during COVID, there are some people that just quit. They just quit church. COVID was an excuse, and then COVID became a reason not to go back to church. And so what happened is many people, once they stopped coming to that sacred assembly, they not only lost connection with God, they lost connection with others. There's actually a label for people that have just quit the church. They're called ex-evangelicals. We love to label everything, right? So we put a label on this group. They're ex-evangelicals. They just quit. Quit altogether. And they lost the connection to God. And they lost a connection with other people. James Barnes is on our staff, part of our pastoral care team, and basically Monday through Thursday, he is on the phone every morning talking to different people. And at least once a week, he's going to have a conversation with somebody that quit back in 20 and hadn't been back. He's having those conversations every week. But here's the flip side to the Sabbath rest. It has its rewards. Rest has its rewards. In all of God's commands and instructions, again, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, you're reading through all these, you're getting a lot of repetition, you're getting a lot of blood, I know all that. But in all of those, particularly we see this in the very beginning in the top 10 things that make God smile, we see in every one of those God's provision and protection. In every one of those commands, we see God's provision and we see God's protection. And I think we see it in this as well. Because he said this in Leviticus 26, starting verse 2, "Observe my Sabbaths and have reverence for my sanctuary. I am the Lord. If you follow my decrees and are careful to obey my commands, I will send you rain in its season." And we all remember, rain is a good thing. All right. "And the ground will yield its crops and the trees their fruit. I will look on you with favor and make you fruitful and increase your numbers. And I will keep my covenant with you." See, when you take the Sabbath, what happens? You have the provision of fruitfulness and you have the protection of God's presence with you. When you take the Sabbath, that's what happens. So you have fruitfulness. The writer says in Leviticus, if you take the Sabbath, you're going to have fruitfulness. And here's the rub for Western Christianity. In Western Christianity, we have so many people that will read about fruitfulness, particularly in the Old Testament, and they interpret that to mean wealth and prosperity. And my gosh, we have a misguided view of what being blessed by God means when we have a Western lens reading the Bible and reading God's story. And we think it's all about financial security and wealth. And we think that's coming from God, when the vast majority of Christians in the world don't have that. But they do have fruitfulness. What do I mean by that? They have what we pray in the Lord's Prayer, our daily bread. What did God give the people as they wandered around? He gave them bread every day. He gave them manna every day. And here we have, if we take the Sabbath, he is saying, you're going to be fruitful, which you're going to have food to feed yourself, food to feed your family. And when you have those basic needs met, and those of you who went through the Maslow hierarchy thing, we know that we have to have the basic needs met before we can enjoy anything else above that. We have those basic needs met, we can enjoy our family. We can enjoy our life. When you take a Sabbath, you got this provision of fruitfulness, but then you also have the presence of God in there. You see, you don't just take the Sabbath to get something. You take the Sabbath to take your focus off yourself and focus on God. Because God, he said, hey, it's a holy day. I'm blessing it, but it's a holy day, holy day, holy day, a sacred assembly. It's holy. Which means we are looking not to ourselves in these moments. On this Sabbath day, we're not looking to ourselves. We're looking beyond ourselves. We're looking to God. We're putting our focus on God. And we put our focus on God, we're taking the focus off of ourselves. When we put our focus on God, then it's a whole lot easier to think about what are the two most important things, to love others and to love God. And we do receive a benefit from that. Jesus says the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath is for you and me. It's for you. From ourselves. We are our own worst enemies. Take the Sabbath. Our focus is on not ourselves. Are being further instructed in Deuteronomy. The reason you take the Sabbath is because now you're no longer slaves. The confines of Egypt and following the identity as a child of God. You take a Sabbath. God pulled you out of that culture into a new culture, a very distinct new culture, a culture that's set apart, that's unlike any other. So what is Sabbath? It's R&R. Rest and recognizing. Rest and recognizing. We rest our bodies. We rest our minds and recognize God's character in us. God desires for us to be holy. He said many times in the Old Testament, particularly Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, be holy as I am holy. In Leviticus itself, the word holy is mentioned 56 times, more than any other time it's mentioned in the Bible. In this one place alone, holy. Holy. You know, holy, most of us don't think that we'll ever be completely holy, but it's what we aspire to, it's what we are trying to attain, because God says, be holy as I am holy. And in doing that, you take a Sabbath, because that's part of the process of being like God. I just want to encourage you. You and I need a Sabbath for our family. I believe we also need a Sabbath for our work. And I think we need a Sabbath for all of our decisions that we make on a daily and weekly basis. Because here's the truth. We are at our best when we have our rest. And I believe you know this truth too. Tired people are tiring people. Right? I believe you realize that too. So my challenge to you today is not prescriptive. I'm not going to give you a prescription and say this is how you do it. Right? But what will you do to take a Sabbath so a Sabbath will not take you? I can tell you that in my 37 years of being a responsible adult, I didn't count those college years, right? That's when I camped out for nights on end to get front row tickets at a Lionel Richie concert, and a Chicago concert, and an Alabama concert, right? Back then, those nights camping out and no sleep didn't affect me. About a year after college, yeah, that started affecting me, right? So I was more responsible and things started hitting me different, all right? So I'm not going to tell you what that looks like for you, because what rest looks like for me now is a whole lot different than what that rest looked like when I had small children in my house. Because when I had small children in my house, rest was a 4-letter word, right? What? We don't use that word around here. Rest when my kids were teenagers is a whole lot different than it is now. So I can't tell you. The rest for you is going to be different from the person sitting beside you. Rest is going to be different from you than it is the other person. You have to determine what that looks like so that the Sabbath won't take you. So it won't take you. Be holy as I am holy, God said. Taking a Sabbath is a move toward being like God. Okay, that might be a little hard for you to handle, so how about this? Taking a move Taking a Sabbath is like taking a move toward looking like Jesus. That's somebody I want to emulate. God, we thank you that, first of all, you have given us literally what we need to find peace and rest. You pointed it out. Just do it. Just do it to take your focus off yourself and put your focus on me. Just do it so your body can recuperate, so your body can be at optimal performance to work and supply what we need in our lives. So you've told us basically what to do. God, the question is how we can do it. God got us and how to do this. Because there's so many of us in this room today that if we're not doing something and we're not moving, we're not involved in something 24/7, we think it's a waste of time. But God, you have provided for us and you have protected us within this simple command to take a Sabbath and do it with other people so you can be reminded you are not alone. God, speak to us and challenge us in these moments and in these days to come. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Would you please stand as we close in worship?